And hello and welcome along. Hi, it's Kathy Frey here from IMCO, from the International Integrated Maternity Healthcare Organisation, and welcome along to this week's webinar, our Maternity Natural Health webinar. And we are very pleased to welcome back Carolyn Ladowski. Hey, say hello, Carolyn.
Hello, everybody. How are you? It's great to be here again.
It is great to have you again because your topic is just so incredibly relevant. Myself and some other colleagues, particularly from IMCO, run a Ask the Maternity Gurus Facebook page where we volunteer time and answer maternity, obstetric, midwifery type questions with women in the world that don't have access to really good information. And boy, I tell you, miscarriage is, I would put it as the number one thing that we get questions about. It's just incredibly prevalent. No, I mean, obviously we know that 30% of pregnancies naturally miscarry, but it is incredibly prevalent as far as for the women themselves going through those journeys. So
Yes.
let's just give a little bit of background first on Carolyn and the topic that she's going to be talking to you about today. So Carolyn Ladowski is the founder of
MTHFR.
MTHFR Support Australia, and she's a naturopath, herbalist, and nutritionist who is very skilled within herbal medicine and obviously naturopathy in general, and nutrition. So this is where she's going to be talking more about this today. And also Carolyn has studied courses in genetics at Duke University, genetics and evolution, which is coming into such a very new area of medicine, epigenetics, she might mention about today. And she's also studied with the University of Maryland, again looking at genes and human conditioning from behavior to biotechnology. And her practice specializes in genetic susceptibility and how this contributes to biochemical dysfunction and chronic health conditions. So the topic that Carolyn's going to be focusing on today is multiple miscarriage and why it can happen. What is miscarriage? Why does it happen? If you've been told you have unexplained miscarriage, what do you do about it? What's that right form of folate, which is a really essential thing that I know that you're going to be talking about today. And how do you know what is right for you? And how do you know how much to take? I can tell you that within obstetric medicine practices here, and I happen to be in New Zealand, and within that system, it is recurrent miscarriage is regarded as 3 or more. And I know in other countries, sometimes it's 2 or more. Yeah, so even sort of knowing for women, am I in that category? It's just that it's such a big journey. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to be handing over to Carolyn, who's got a presentation that will take half an hour or so, and then we've got plenty of time at the end for questions if anybody has any. Feel free, for those watching, to go into the chat and let us know whereabouts you are in the world and your profession, if you're one of the lovely people watching live today. And of course there's the Q&A button down the bottom where you can put any questions in. So welcome Carolyn. Great.
Thank you, Kathy. Yes, it's great to be here, and I've got to say I really just love talking about this topic because I think if anyone can gain even the slightest bit of advantage by listening to something like this and saying, okay, I think I'm going to change something that I'm doing, or I'm going to change the way that I treat my patients, I think that's a really good thing. And as you said, my practice really revolves around looking at genetic susceptibility. There's a whole, I guess, medical profession doesn't like to acknowledge the fact that MTHFR, which is the gene that regulates folate metabolism, actually has anything to do with it. But this is why I wanted to share my research with you today, because I'm, on top of everything else, I'm doing a PhD with the University of Technology, Sydney. And my topic is folate for recurrent miscarriage. So I'm going to be looking at the difference between methylfolate and folic acid for women with multiple miscarriage. So
that's I didn't realize that you're starting a doctorate. Oh, well, congratulations, boy. That's
yes,
going to kind of set the set the, what do we call it, the
cat amongst the
yes,
pigeons.
when that piece of research comes out.
Yes.
And yeah, that's going to be fantastic. So how far away is that going to be in completion? What sort of year?
Well, we submitted our ethics proposal in May. We're now up to our 3rd revision. So we're hoping that we get ethics approval very, very shortly. I'm really hoping by the end of this month we'll have ethics approval to proceed, which means we'll be getting everything ready and probably start recruitment maybe October if we can do it. Otherwise, it'll be towards the end of this year with a view to start January for the actual trial, and we'll run all of next year.
Right. So 2024, I guess, is when we're going to hopefully have some published journaled results on that one.
Yes. And I actually I'm going to share with you this morning my published paper that's just appeared in Nutrients Journal on the very topic of folic acid. And I think it's I think even if you don't subscribe to the whole MTHFR, which, look, at the end of the day, it's a gene that regulates biochemistry. So how it can be considered to be unimportant, I actually don't know the answer to that, because it is just simply biochemistry. And so we have to appreciate that if some people in their biochemistry have a problem making a form of folate that we have to use for fertility, then we can understand how important this actually might be. And I think part of the problem too is that people don't understand the difference between different forms of folate, and that's what I want to talk about today. So
there's a huge misunderstanding on that, you know, within a lot of, not just with the public who are completely bamboozled by it, but very much so within our health professionals, as you're well aware. So
yes.
Right. So look, we're going to hand over now to.
And you can see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Good.
So that's fantastic.
Okay.
All right.
Wonderful. So my PhD project is titled Folate Trial for Recurrent Miscarriage. And as I just said, we're going to initially do a feasibility trial to see if we can proceed with a larger trial to test whether methylfolate is better than folic acid for women who have had a recurrent miscarriage. And I really want to acknowledge my amazing supervisors. It's a very difficult thing to go from a clinical perspective and then become a researcher, because as a clinician, we know and understand and see certain things happening and we go, oh, okay, there's a direct association. But when you put your researcher hat on, you're not allowed to do that. You've got to let the research sort of evolve and in a way answer the question. So they've been fabulous for me. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the background, look at miscarriage rates, form of folate, show you my recent literature review, which I think in itself is very eye-opening. And for you in New Zealand, I don't think, Kathy, and I'm sorry if you've turned your mic off, that you've actually are doing fortification of foods as yet, but I think it's a very hot topic. Is that right?
I would say that it is an area that's been slightly dabbled in. But it's certainly not a hot topic as far as consumers are concerned.
But it's not
So
mandatory from a government point of view at this point,
No.
is it? No. So there's
And
voluntary fortification, not mandatory.
Yes, exactly. And
Right.
there is, I would say that there would be a pretty strong resistance to making anything mandatory. We have a current government who has done a lot of things mandatory, which has been rather foreign for Kiwis. So, for example, things like putting fluoride into drinking water. So controversial, and there's various different opinions on it, but the government is keen to make it mandatory.
Yes, I saw a paper on that.
Yeah, and the public are keen that it is not mandatory.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in the coming years here. But of course, we've got a lot of our audience is in America, and Asia and Europe, but particularly in America, the audience here. So I imagine that would all be, state related and things like that.
Well, no, in actual fact, Australia, US, Canada are the three big mandatory fortification countries in the world. And there's a big push at the moment, particularly in the US, to increase the rate of fortification. So it's definitely something I think that needs to be flagged, because I think it is an issue. And for those people that are listening in the mandatory fortification countries, what I've got to say today is even more important.
Wow. Okay. All right.
All right. So so let's talk about miscarriages first. There are 23 million miscarriages worldwide each year, affecting roughly about 15.3% of all pregnancies. We know that 50% of them are just put down to unknown cause. But, people will say, and look, that's probably the majority of patients that we see, that they've been to the doctor, they've had more than one miscarriage. And by the way, the official definition now has changed about recurrent pregnancy loss, and it's defined as 2 or more pregnancies. It used to be 3. It is now defined as 2 or more pregnancies is known as a recurrent pregnancy loss. I'd
say that's quite fascinating in itself.
Yeah.
That's been officially changed.
Yes.
Are they talking, when you say recurrent, are they talking of 2 in a row, or if somebody had a miscarriage, a successful pregnancy, a miscarriage,
No, just 2.
Just 2, right?
2.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be in a row.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's quite something.
Yes, it is, because I think what we're realizing is that more and more women are having miscarriages. And as you quite rightly said at the very beginning, we look at it often from a health practitioner point of view, but from a patient point of view, for them to go to the doctor and say, well, I've had a miscarriage, and 99.9% of the response will be, I'm sorry to hear that, but it's perfectly normal. Just keep trying and do what you're doing. And if there's one takeout that I would like people to take today, please don't say that. And please do not assume that if you've done something one way and fallen pregnant, that is the way to go. My philosophy is, if you continue to do the same thing, then you will end up with the same answer. You have to change what you are doing. And so when we consider that the leading prenatal multivitamin in this country is still folic acid based, I think we've got a lot of conversations to have with patients on that very topic. And so the emotional, financial, because obviously a lot of them, once it gets to 3 particularly, they're just pushed straight into IVF. But unfortunately, IVF does not solve the problem. Because if the problem is your DNA, which is the issue that you have if you're using the wrong form of folate, or you're using a form of folate you can't metabolize, then you're still going to have a problem with your assisted reproductive technologies. And so our philosophy at MTHFR Support is that you still need to prepare exactly the same way you would for a natural pregnancy as you would to go into IVF or ART. So because you want the quality of the DNA to be there, it doesn't matter that you're going into IVF. And I think that's why IVF has such a poor success rate. It's less than 30% across the world. It's a very poor success rate because these women that are having issues are pushed into IVF saying that that will solve the problem, but they're not looking at the DNA quality of the male or the female at that particular point in time. So given this whole situation that we're in terms of statistics of women having miscarriage, IVF not really being, or ART not really being that successful, there's a lot of interest worldwide in being able to reduce the incidence of pregnancy loss. And so I think, as I said, a very, very important part of this conversation is the difference in the folate forms, because traditionally we have used the word folate to generically mean folic acid and vice versa. So when a doctor says folate, they mean folic acid. They don't usually mean methylfolate, and they don't mean folinic. And so I think that's a really important distinction to remember, that folic acid is synthetic. It's man-made, and the body can't use it unless you've got the genes to use it. Folinic, which I'm sure a lot of you are have used in the past, it is metabolically active, but at the end of the day, it still has to be converted to methylfolate, which is the main form of folate in the circulation. It is the biologically active form of folate. So if you can't convert folic or folinic to methylfolate, you have a problem, because fertility and a successful pregnancy relies on the fact that you can actually convert to methylfolate, which methylates, creates SAMe, and regulates your gene expression and your DNA quality. That's the key to this. If you can't do that because you have a problem with your biochemistry and all your genes, or you're taking too much folic acid, which most women are if they're taking a multivitamin or prenatal with folic acid, they're actually taking more than they should be. And yet there are calls worldwide, particularly in the US, to increase the dose of fortification. Now, believe it or not, I actually drew this for this paper. And I like it because we can see how we do this conversion, particularly of folic acid versus methylfolate. So when we eat a leafy green vegetable, it's actually a polyglutamate, and we've got to convert it to a monoglutamate, which then in the brush border gets transferred quite well, in actual fact, to a reduced folate and to methylfolate. But folic acid actually does not get converted particularly well in the brush border enzyme, because again, it's got to use these genes to do so. So in actual fact, most of the folic acid that we take across that brush border enzyme goes into the portal vein unchanged as folic acid. Whereas leafy green vegetables, as long as we can convert it in the brush border enzyme by this reduced folate carrier, we can convert it pretty well to methylfolate. So we've already converted to methylfolate mostly. It goes into the portal vein, and that is used straight away as methylfolate and then utilized by the cells. But with folic acid, we don't do that. So it's then got to go to the liver, and folic acid uses these genes, these enzymes, dihydrofolate reductase and MTHFD1 and MTHFR, to then make folic acid. So that is a process. We do not just make folic acid directly to methylfolate. It has to be converted in the liver through multiple genes and multiple steps to become methylfolate, which is then what we use. Not only is it what the placenta uses, but it's what the brain uses for folate. So we're actually seeing emerging studies to show that if the baby doesn't get enough methylfolate, then the brain, as in ADD, perhaps ADHD, learning difficulties, autism, may be affected by the lack of methylfolate. And if we look at the research to date.
Can I just interrupt?
Yes.
I'm the devil's advocate, in case anybody else is wondering this question. Why then why are we not giving women supplements of methylfolate? Or is that not possible? How does that work?
Well, yes, we actually 10
years.
There's
no conversion needed at all.
Yes, so 10 years ago, we, MTHFR Support, I developed a prenatal multivitamin, which is available in New Zealand and the rest of the world, with methylfolate.
Right.
And so there are other.
So it is possible.
It is possible.
I didn't know if maybe there's some reason scientifically it's not possible, but it is possible. So you have to scratch your head and go, well, if it's possible, why aren't everybody doing this?
Well, the problem is this, Kathy, that even though there's research to show that they've used methylfolate, they've said they believe that it is as good out as, if not better than folic acid in making sure that neural tube defects are prevented. There is no definitive long-term high-scale research study that says categorically methylfolate prevents neural tube defects. That's the only problem we have.
Right.
Because if you see point 1, folic acid has been the form of folate that has traditionally been used in fortification and supplements, and that's the only reason, because that's where the research lies, because we've always used it.
Yes, and the folic acid, the primary reason that it's been given at that point is to help prevent neural tube defects.
Correct.
But what is not being addressed is how having that methylfolate instead of folic acid would be helping fertility and reducing miscarriage.
Yes.
So,
and this is the biggest
visioned onto one topic and not the other topic. Whereas I imagine that if women received methylfolate instead of folic acid, it would cover both bases, both fertility, reducing miscarriages, and also cover neural tube defect protection.
Correct.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, I'm just speaking what is obviously kind of the obvious, but I just thought I'd add that in there in case anybody else was wondering about that question.
Yes. And this is the problem, that the research only really, I mean, there is emerging research. This is why I believe my research is so important, because we need to be looking at, sure, folic acid has been around, it's what we've used, but it doesn't mean that that's what we have to use going forward. We have to look at, we have to develop research that says, okay, to every single doctor and midwife and obstetrician out there, we need some sort of research that is a randomized clinical controlled trial over a 10-year study to say, okay, we gave them methylfolate versus folic acid. we had a successful pregnancy, we didn't have a neural tube defect, and by the way, the kids are fine. I mean, that's what we really need. And we need to look at developmental milestones in both groups so that we can actually look at a big study. That's not my study. My study is not going to be that big, but I'm definitely looking at the miscarriage rate, because from 10, 12 years in clinical practice, I know from a clinical perspective that if I swap out folic acid and put methylfolate in, I will reduce the chance of miscarriage by probably 99%.
Wow, that's massive.
But I have to.
Now, I know that you did mention before that there are supplements available.
Yes.
That include that. So certainly before the end of the session, we'll make sure that you mention a little bit more detail about those so people can access them.
Sure.
But sorry, I will be quiet and let you carry on.
Okay, so the Australian government recommends 400 micrograms per day for women in preconception and pregnancy. In governments overseas like Canada and the US, it can be more than that. It can be between 400 and 600 micrograms a day. But every government realizes and understands that folate is important for preconception and pregnancy. Unmetabolized folic acid, though, is the level of folic acid that is not converted. So if I go back to that previous slide, so we say folic acid comes in, gets converted in the liver. If folic acid cannot be processed, and there's a certain amount per day that can, if it can't be, what happens is it goes straight into the plasma as unmetabolized folic acid. So it doesn't get converted to methyl. It's called unmetabolized folic acid because it stays there unconverted. Now, research is there. There's a variety of different research studies, some at different levels, but it pretty well says that, firstly, anyone that lives in a fortified country, so particularly Australia, US, and Canada, if you are eating any bread or any products that have folic acid, you will have levels of unmetabolized folic acid. Every single child who is breastfed by a woman who is eating those foods has unmetabolized folic acid in their system. And it can appear even at very low levels. This unmetabolized folic acid, and this is also a very big issue that I have, it has been linked in research studies to cancer, cardiovascular disease, infertility, autism, reduced natural killer cell activity, obesity, and insulin resistance. Now, it's not categorical research. It is just association and links in research. But even in my mind, the slightest link to cancer, we've got to take that. We've actually got to look at that and go, hello. There is a researcher in New Zealand, Olivia Gracia, who I actually spoke to this week, who is doing research about the photosensitivity and the issue that you have with your immune system with folic acid. He's been trying for 4 years to get funding to do a greater research study. So there are researchers around the world looking at this unmetabolized folic acid and saying, I'm not happy with it. We need to do something about it because there are links to diseases that, there shouldn't be. And I think if there's a slightest chance that there's also a photosensitivity issue, then if you're taking folic acid and exposed to sun, you could understand why perhaps we have increased melanoma. So there are a lot of issues with this unmetabolized folic acid that we don't fully understand, that we do not have really good research for right now, but it is coming. And I think if there's any question at this point, we need to listen to it and do something about it. The next point is that methylfolate, as I said, or 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, is the biologically active form. Now, the research that we do have to date says, number one, it raises folate levels as good as, if not better than folic acid. It does it quicker than folic acid. It doesn't mask a B12 deficiency, which folic acid does, and it has no ability to build up. You do not get unmetabolized folic acid from methylfolate. It is an impossibility. And so there are also some researchers, including me, that say it is perhaps a better option to prevent miscarriage, especially in those with MTHFR polymorphisms, which is the gene that will then regulate how folate works. Now, this is the result of a case series study that I did for my honours a couple of years ago. And these are the results. So we asked Australian practitioners to give us information on women that were having recurrent miscarriage. They had to have had MTHFR polymorphisms, and we asked them to tell us, what did you do? What was the success or failure rate? And what did you do in regards to folic acid? So 75% of them took their patients off all forms of folic acid. So out of the food, out of the supplements. They had, these women overall, the 12 women had an 83% of them had miscarriage. And you can see here, 1 failed miscarriage, 3 failed IVF, 5 miscarriages, 2 miscarriages, 3 failed IUIs, 2 miscarriages, 5 failed IVF, 2 miscarriages, 1 trisomy, 3 miscarriages, 2, this poor woman had 10 failed IVF, etc. Now, the results were that, well, every woman was given methylfolate, every single one. And these levels down the left-hand side are actually the levels of methylfolate that these women were given. Now, you saw from my previous slide that the government recommends 400 to 500 micrograms for women in preconception and pregnancy. But if these women have MTHFR and can't convert, you can see that the success rate, and by the way, 10 of the 12 had a successful pregnancy, as in a live birth. This woman here had actually 2 miscarriages in the treatment time, but you can see she was on the lowest form of folate for her polymorphism. So these were levels anywhere between sort of 1,500 micrograms to 3,800 micrograms is what was used to achieve a successful pregnancy in these women with MTHFR polymorphisms. Not one of them was left on folic acid, and there was a 91.3% success rate in getting a successful pregnancy. And I would like to think if this woman had been given more methylfolate, she probably would have had a successful pregnancy. This woman was the only one that did not fall pregnant, but unfortunately we didn't have any visibility with regards to the partners in this study. So we don't know, did the partner have MTHFR as well? And that does make a big difference for the men. So on the back of all this research, I conducted a literature review to find out, well, okay, what is the level of folic acid that women are exposed to in those countries where there's fortification? And I started off with 1,885 studies and ended up with 36 in which to review. This is my published paper, Women Taking a Folic Acid Supplement in Countries with Mandatory Food Fortification Programs May Be Exceeding the Upper Tolerable Limit. And this was published in June of this year. Now, if you look at what the review found, it found number one, which was very surprising to me, in that women in preconception and pregnancy do not get anywhere near the recommended intake of folate from their diet. 205 micrograms, which is half, and sometimes, you know, in Canada and US, less than half, get enough folate from their diet. So can we say that without a supplement, women are getting enough folate? No, we cannot rely on food to support preconception and pregnancy. They are not getting enough. If you look at the average, and this is the average amount that women are getting from fortified foods in fortified countries, it ranged anything from, you know, 100 micrograms to sometimes 600 micrograms, but the average was about 181.7 micrograms a day in fortified food. And even if you add those two together, you still do not get the 400 micrograms. So women are deficient. If they're not taking a supplement, they are deficient in folate. Now, if we add a multivitamin, a prenatal with folic acid, almost every woman was exceeding the upper limit that the Institute of Medicine in the United States says is safe. So they have said that 1,000 micrograms of folic acid a day is the upper tolerable limit that women and anyone of adult age should be having, because at that level, it masks a B12 deficiency. No conversation about other diseases, no conversation about propensity to cancer, no conversation about metabolism. So this is only, this upper tolerable limit is only set based on masking a B12 deficiency. Nothing to do with how you use it. To Kathy's point at the beginning, it doesn't matter that it, you know, at the end of the day, that's the limit that masks a B12 deficiency. There's no conversation around what level is actually able to be used by the body. And this unmetabolized folic acid in pregnancy is contributing to unmetabolized folic acid levels in 97% of women. And 93% of cord blood samples had unmetabolized folic acid. That's what my review highlighted. So I would definitely recommend you read my paper, because it gives you all the background about how, and I will, Kathy, I'll send you the link to the paper, but you've got the topic there anyway. So the key questions that we've got to answer with the research is this: if women are exceeding the upper limit as set by the Institute of Medicine, but they need more folate, is there a better form that we should be taking? And to Kathy's point in the beginning, well, is it methylfolate? Is that what we should be doing? And if it is methylfolate, does it prevent neural tube defects? Original research suggests that it does. And does it prevent pregnancy loss? That's what we need to answer. And if methylfolate does not build up and there's no upper tolerable limit, then why don't we tell women to have a prenatal with a methylfolate instead? And to date, if we look at the research studies that have been done, not all of them around preconception and pregnancy, but with mental health, it has really good safety levels, a safety profile at high levels. So 7.5 milligrams, 7,500 milligrams twice a day has been used in some anxiety and depression studies with no safety issues. Mm-hmm. So I think we can be confident at this point that there is a good safety profile for it. So my research question is going to be initially, what is the feasibility of conducting a randomized clinical trial to test methylfolate versus folic acid to prevent recurrent pregnancy loss? Because even though we use all these protocols in clinic, we still need to understand if women in a clinical trial are actually going to follow what we want them to do. And there are certain things that we do want them to do. First of all, we want to see, is the full protocol going to be okay? Will women do everything that we want them to do? And the key things we want them to do is avoid folic acid in their diet, take a prenatal multivitamin for 2 reproductive cycles before they try to fall pregnant. Their partner must do the same, and they must avoid all fortified foods. Now, in New Zealand, that's not going to be such a big deal, but in countries like Australia, US, and Canada, where most foods are fortified with folic acid, we've had to put through, extensive lists together to say, okay, at the supermarket, if you go in and you want bread, you've got to get this brand, not this brand. And it's literally just giving them a step-by-step thing on what they can and can't eat. So we've also got to look at the practicalities of it. Can we scale this up to be a much larger, a large trial with really good sample size? So it is, we need any study that we do, it has got to be relevant, clinically relevant, and we've got to be able to extrapolate it to a larger community to be able to say, this is a trial that we need to all look at. And we need to look at, what are the barriers around medical professions, even government policymakers around this whole shift of folic acid versus methylfolate. What are the obstacles to implementing a change in policy to say, if you're going to have a prenatal multivitamin, don't have folic acid, have methylfolate-based multivitamin. That's what we really need to understand. Is that something that's likely to happen if this trial is successful? So it's going to be a combination of, it's a mixed method study, which means we're using qualitative and quantitative. Initially, it's just a pilot study to make sure that we can extrapolate this out to a much bigger trial. We're going to be recruiting women 20 to 49 years of age with a history of 2 or more pregnancy losses and their reproductive partner. And we're going to ask them not to fall pregnant for 2 reproductive cycles while they both take the prenatal multivitamin, and then try to conceive for 9 months. So it's a it will be a year by the time that we finish. So we're hoping to recruit between now and, well, probably January to April will be more realistic, that we'll recruit then and commence from April to April. So we'll have a methylfolate arm where we'll have a multivitamin with only methylfolate, and then we'll have a multivitamin, prenatal multivitamin with only folic acid, and we will compare the 2 groups. And as I said, eligibility criteria, obviously women and their partners, 2 or more pregnancy losses, able to speak English just so that they can really understand what we're asking them to do. And we're going to do blood collection because we're actually going to test the levels of unmetabolized folic acid in both groups at baseline and after the washout period of, say, the first 3 months, to make sure that when we start in the methylfolate group, they do not have any unmetabolized folic acid in their system. And as I said, we're going to ask them to eliminate folic acid foods, collect bloods, and they'll meet with me every six weeks to sort of, just document their progress and how they're going to be going. As I said at the beginning, we're in the process of ethics, really hoping that it will be approved this month. And then we'll go on with all the dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and commencing for the trial. Yes, we really need support for this trial. So if anyone is interested in donating, just one thing we need, for example, is we need nearly $7,000 just in post bags to send out the product to the participants in the trial. It's just a costly exercise. So just something as simple as post bags. So even if, you're happy to donate $12.95, which is what one post bag costs. I will, once we've got ethics approval, I will send Kathy the link, and I'd really appreciate any support you could give us through our funding process. I think we've done quite well with the funding so far. It's just little things like this that we need to really get support for. So I think that's it, Kathy. If anyone does want to contact me, read this project, here's my research email. Or if you're interested in more, if you're a practitioner and you're interested in our practitioner trainings, which sort of teach you more about the genetics, or you're a someone who's had multiple miscarriage and want to get support through, we've got 9 practitioners in our team, and you want to get support for preventing miscarriage, there's our email address. So it's a big conversation, Kathy, and it's probably one that we could go on for hours and hours and hours, but I think it's a really, really important one. And one thing that I did not say that I really do want to say is that when we look at genetic pathways, and what I'm going to actually do, I just want to show you something which I think I've stopped sharing just so I can bring up I just want to bring up the folate pathway to show you how this folic acid is actually converted. Because one thing that we know from research, and it's really, like, it is absolutely 100% that folic acid, the genes that regulate it, only cope with 200 to 300 micrograms per day, right? So if we say that, if you look at the leading prenatal multivitamin in Australia that has folic acid, has 800 micrograms, most of the prenatals in Canada and US have 800 or 1,000. So automatically you're above the limit that the Institute of Medicine has deemed safe. But the big thing is that when you have folic acid, and you saw my chart, it had that dihydrofolate reductase, the MTHFD1 and MTHFR to actually convert it to methylfolate. But dihydrofolate reductase, which is the main gene that does the converting, only copes with 200 to 300 micrograms a day. So this gene here, after 200 to 300 micrograms, it goes straight to here, unmetabolized folic acid. It can't progress to methylfolate. So if you're taking a prenatal multivitamin with 800, forget the masking of the B12, forget the upper toxicity limit, you can't use it. And this is what people do not understand.
No, not at all. Absolutely, that's not a nobody, very, very, very few people understand what's going on with this information. What is there? Can I again just be the devil's advocate with the couple of questions? But is there a other reason that makes sense as to why the emphasis has been so much on folic acid?
Yes, there is, because
how did that come about?
Because methylfolate was only developed in, I think we launched it here in Australia in 2017, 18. So we'd been using it in clinic by getting our patients to get it from the US, because they were a bit ahead of us. So they probably launched it, I want to say early 2010s, 10, 12, 13, 14 maybe. So up until that time, there was no other form available. You could not buy methylfolate. You couldn't buy Folinic, or you could buy Folinic in Australia then. And because folic acid is cheap and it's easy to make in a lab, it's obviously, and it's very stable. And that's why it's used in food fortification. So a lot of the researchers the food researchers out there are now trying to say, how do we make methylfolate more stable to be able to put it in foods instead of folic acid?
Right. So there is starting to see that shift of mindset, but they're just not.
But only at the research level. And unfortunately, research is 20 years ahead of clinical practice in reality. And that's what's alarming to me. We cannot wait 20 years for this research to filter down to mainstream medicine to say, just keep taking folic acid and hope for the best. We have to make significant changes.
Absolutely. And there's always been that disconnect between academia, research, and frontline consumer knowledge. And you see this all the time, don't you? That, amazing research is done in lots and lots of areas, and, may, hopefully get into to be to the point of published. So at least colleagues can learn about that particular piece of research, but getting it from the academia of university knowledge right down through the system to the consumer awareness is there's no direct pathway that ever occurs.
No, and it's really a public. I mean, what I'm hoping this research will do is at least get public health policymakers. I mean, there is a very alarming push in the US right now to take folic acid fortification levels to ridiculous levels. Ridiculous. And so we desperately need research.
Right.
Because it's the only way that the policymakers will stop and go, well, maybe this isn't a great idea.
Yeah, because they until they have that information,
they're not going to make any.
That's what they're doing. They'll carry on doing what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
I know myself, I was a research midwife for a time with Auckland University, and the thing that I had always known, but that became very in the face, was that the more we research, the more we realize we don't understand.
Yeah.
And every piece of research, so often will the outcome of that research will go, wow, didn't expect that outcome. And it sort of creates a new reason of a new piece of research. And so the idea that there is almost a complacency a little bit sometimes of an assumption that by consumers that our medical doctors in mainstream medicine know everything now.
Yeah.
And that they have all the answers. And no, they don't.
Well, and it's impossible. They just, I mean, I've spent 12 years of my life only looking at folate, methylfolate, folic acid, the differences between them, testing it with patients, looking at the difference. I mean, this is my life. And it's impossible for a medical doctor to know even a 1/100th of what is going on in the research, because it just takes too much time. I really think this is a policy issue. I think we need to take this sort of research to policymakers and present at every place we can possibly present to get the awareness of. And it is at medical conferences that we will make inroads, but we can't do it until we have the research.
So my other couple of questions there is, firstly, as you've just answered that, you've spent 12 years, looking at folate and methylfolate. And so that's obviously, one mineral. So what's your perspective, having focused on one in relationship to miscarriage, what's your perspective on all the other vitamins and minerals and genes, turning them on and off, and metabolism of, I mean, are there other ones that you think are also, potentially very influential on fertility and miscarriage
well, you
rates,
asked
but,
me, I don't know if I can, well, I guess I can talk about the supplements. You asked me where they're available. So in New Zealand, FX Med has our prenatal multivitamin, and so does
I'll let
NutriSearch.
you go through the countries of where the people can access it.
Well, if they just contact our reception, info@mthfrsupport.com.au, we can let them know. So we're on Amazon in the US. They can just order it directly from Amazon. We also have our fertility website.
And what's the brand name?
MTHFR Support.
Great.
So it's MTHFR Support. You can get it from our US, so Canada and US, you can get it from our website, mthfrfertility.com. And for New Zealanders and Australians, mthfrsupport.com.au. And you can also get it from Oborn and Vitally here in Australia, and you can get it from NutriSearch and FX Med in New Zealand.
Fantastic. So as you say, anybody can contact you with the other queries.
Yeah.
Location. So my other question is, what's been your experience of the general receptivity of obstetric and maternity colleagues to your information and your research and your passion really on this topic? Are you finding that people are fairly open-minded, or are you finding there's a lot of very closed-minded opinions?
No, well, I've actually gone, because we do a fair bit of work with Monash Fertility, City Fertility, Janaea, and I've gone to present to the fertility specialists there, and the reception has actually been amazing, particularly because I actually went and presented my case study, and I'm really trying to get this published. That's my focus at the moment, to get this paper published on the case series, because they were fascinated by that, where we've taken women with a really strong history of miscarriage and failed IVF, failed IUI, changed what we did, and we had a 91.3% success rate. So they were really interested in that. And so a lot of them, it's funny, they don't really understand MTHFR, but what they do is go, oh, you've got MTHFR, you need to see MTHFR Support. And you do all your preconception care with them and then come back to us. But in actual fact, I had to laugh because we've been working with some of these fertility specialists for a long time, and they send the patients to us for preconception care. But the problem is they fall pregnant themselves and have babies, and they don't go back to the fertility specialist. So I laugh and say, you sure you want to keep referring people, because you're doing yourself out of a job?
I love that. What an awesome thing to have be happening.
Yeah. So it's good. No, and look, I'm very passionate about it. We do have a question. Let me just see. John, hello. My fiance has had 4 miscarriages over the last year. We were unable to get help from the medical community. We were only allowed to see a doctor this week at 13 weeks. I changed her prenatals to one with folate after doing my own research, because no medical professionals would help us. So thank you so much for this information. Awesome, John. See, I love that, because my whole practice, we have a patient knowledge centre, and we encourage patients from every walk of life to join that knowledge centre, so that we can empower them to take their health into their own hands. And John's done that, and that is absolutely awesome, John. I'm so pleased for you. It's just such a lovely, when I hear things like that, I'm really happy, because I just think fantastic, absolutely fantastic. You didn't get the help you needed, but you took it into your own hands. You did your own research. And I think that as practitioners, that's what we need to do. We need to empower patients to really understand what they need to do, what makes sense to you, what doesn't make sense, and therefore, what are you going to do? So I think that's awesome.
It's that taking ownership, isn't it?
It is.
Look, it's just been so lovely to have you back again. And what you're doing is changing outcomes, and that is just huge. So it's just great to have you here. And for those who are watching live, you will receive a automated message in 24 hours or 23 hours, which will have some contact details there and links. But of course, for those who are watching later on, you know, you're welcome to be contacting Carolyn, and the information's been there. One other question we've got here, Dr. Ben Lynch in the USA talks about this. Any thoughts on his work?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I know Dr. Lynch very well. We work together in many areas. I support him, he supports me. His conversation, in fact, I contacted him when I decided to do the research, and he was like, oh my God, amazing, we need it. That's fantastic. So yes, we're on exactly the same page. We're working tirelessly behind the scenes. I just decided the research was something that we needed. So yes, he's on the same page. We have exactly the same. He probably is slightly different to me in that he does believe we need folinic acid as well. I don't. I think we only really need methylfolate if we're supporting those recycling pathways, which is, to your question, we developed this prenatal multivitamin to support the pathways that needed to recycle the methylfolate. So my point of view is if methylfolate is the biologically active form, why would you use folinic? Because in my initial testing in genetics, where I was testing the women with multiple miscarriage, a lot of them had this gene MTHFS, which also regulates folinic. And so they couldn't convert the folinic. So I figured, well, why use folinic if most of these women with recurrent miscarriage have got a problem with folinic as well? Why on earth would I give folinic? So I only started to use methylfolate, and we get the success from that. So I don't see a need to use folinic.
Yeah, so you've got two at the moment. There's two slightly different, hypotheses, I guess, and viewpoints, and that's so fantastic. But at the end of the day, it's that.
But we're both on the same page, 100%, that don't use folic acid. 100%, we agree that should come out.
Well, thank you so much. Is there, we are over time now. So is there anything else, Carolyn, that you'd like to just finish up with before we conclude?
Look, we have got the most amazing website for resources. So mthfrsupport.com.au. We're just actually about to revamp it, but from a practitioner point of view, we've got an amazing institute learning program for practitioners. As I said before, we've got the Patient Knowledge Center, so you can join that. It's like $14 a month. It's not a big outlay, but there's so many resources. There's hundreds of webinars on hundreds of different topics. So if anyone wants any information, even information on supplements, just go to our website and you'll probably find everything that you need there.
Fantastic. And just repeat finally the website address again.
mthfrsupport.com.au.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Carolyn. It's neat to have you back again. And thank you to those who joined us live. It's always great to have that audience with us. And of course, we know that lots of people are watching this later on down the track. And so thank you again. And I want to wish everybody a lovely rest of the week. And to you too. Obviously, Carolyn, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for your passion for what you're doing. It's changing outcomes, and very likely in a decade from now, this will just be no-brainer.
I'm hoping it's not going to take a decade, but I certainly will keep pushing until it is.
And people will be really remembering these, leading edge discussions. So thank you again, and wish everybody a lovely rest of your week. So bye, everybody.
Thank you very much.